Good afternoon, everyone, and I just want to first introduce myself. My name is Lisa Sanchez, and I am a senior at Dembo High School in Central Kentucky, and I am a member of the Kentucky Student Voice Team, and I want to officially welcome all of you to our Rose Revival campaign and our Rose Revival hearing today on school governance, and that includes school boards, school-based decision-making councils, and also how decisions get made in our Kentucky public schools. And we are really glad you're here. And for those who may not be familiar with us here, the Kentucky Student Voice Team is a youth-led, intergenerationally sustained organization working to create more just and democratic Kentucky schools and communities through storytelling, research, and policy. For over a decade, we've worked to ensure students are not just impacted by education policy, but also have an active voice in shaping education policy. And today's hearing is a part of our broader Rose Revival campaign, which we officially launched in 2023. And for some context, in 1989, the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled in Rose v. Council for Better Education, our entire system of public education was unconstitutional. But the court didn't just identify problems. It defined what an adequate education must look like through outlining 7 capacities, which we like to call, and the court calls, 7 Rose capacities. Those capacities go beyond academics. They include civic preparedness, they include communication skills, understanding of democratic systems, and the ability to meaningfully participate in a democratic society. And you can see those capacities over there. Following that decision, the Kentucky passed the Kentucky Education Reform Act, KERA, which fundamentally restructured how schools are governed. KERA was built on a core idea that public education should be both equitable and also democratic. It decentralized decision-making, created school-based decision-making councils, and worked to ensure that parents, educators, and communities all had a real voice in shaping decision-making in schools and the way that schools operate today. But our campaign asks the simple question that is, looking now, 36 years later, are we still living up to the vision outlined in the Rose case? Last year, after extensive research, public forums, and conversations with Kentuckians across the state, we filed a lawsuit, Kentucky Student Voice v. Council v. Commonwealth of Kentucky, alleging that the state is no longer meeting its constitutional obligation to provide students with an adequate and equitable education. As the case moves forward, we know that the courts alone cannot define what a better system of education looks like. And that is why we're here today, because we know that we have to do that together. This hearing is part of our effort to build a public understanding of how Kentucky's education systems work and also how they should work in the future. Today, we'll focus specifically on school governance, who holds power in our communities, how decisions are made, and whether those systems are aligned with the democratic vision outlined with Rose. We will hear from expert witnesses, followed by questions from student examiners, and then open the floor for audience engagement. Before we begin the testimonies, we want to ground ourselves with the current state of school governance in Kentucky today. But before I begin that context, I want to recognize anyone in the room who has served on a school board, an SBDM council, or a school leadership role. And if that is you, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those roles are essential to how our schools function and to how communities are able to shape their school systems. The Rose decision made it clear that Kentucky's education system had been undermined by political patronage, inequity, and also a lack of accountability. KERA responded by redesigning governance, not just to improve efficiency, but also to strengthen democracy as a whole in public education. School boards were meant to provide oversight and represent the will of the public and of the people. School-based decision-making councils, or SBDMs, were created to ensure that decisions about curriculum, staffing, discipline, and scheduling were made by the people closest to students. And these are educators, parents, and principals. Together, these structures were designed to balance local control, professional expertise, and public accountability. And for a time, they helped move Kentucky forward. But over the past decade, that balance has begun to shift. And this legislative session has accelerated that shift. We are now seeing active efforts to centralize decision-making power and weaken local democratic governance. Senate Bill 152, which passed in the Senate but not in the House, would have effectively eliminated SBDM councils, reducing parents, educators, and community members to advisory roles who have no real authority. At the same time, Senate Bill 114 would have removed the ability of voters in Kentucky's largest districts to elect their own school boards, taking a core mechanism of public accountability out of the hands of local communities. Eventually, legislators settled on SB1 and SB4, efforts that further politicized Kentucky boards while shifting powers from boards to administrative hands. These proposals are not isolated. They represent a broader shift away from the democratic vision that defined KIRA and toward a system where decision-making power is concentrated in the hands of few people. And it's not shared among many people. And importantly, these changes are not being driven by clear evidence that existing governance structures are actually failing, which raises a fundamental question. If an adequate education includes preparation for civic participation, what does it mean when students are educated in systems that are becoming less democratic themselves? Governance is not separate from outcomes. Who makes decisions and how they are made shapes everything, from resource allocation to school culture to opportunities that students have access to. And so today we are asking, are Kentucky's current governance structures aligned with the vision that the core represented in Rose? Are communities meaningfully included in decision making? And what happens when those structures are weakened or even removed? And with that, I'll turn it over to Lacey.
Thank you, Louisa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Lacey Page. I'm a senior at Christian County High School. So we're now moving into the heart of today's session, testimony from our expert witnesses, and then followed by examination by our student examiners. So I'll just introduce our witnesses. First, we'll be calling Ms. Liz Irwin. Liz is currently the Executive Director of Kentucky Association of School Councils. Liz previously served as the principal of Paint Lake Elementary, a national blue ribbon school in Girard County. She was also the assistant principal of Woodlawn Elementary in Boyle County, and a teacher and council member in the Danville schools. And in her free time, she loves to cook, travel, and read. And then next will be Justin Bathen. Dr. Bathen is an associate professor of educational leadership studies at the University of Kentucky. At UK, he is a faculty director of the Center for Next Generation Leadership and the Next Generation Scholars Dual Credit Program. He is a former high school teacher, lawyer, and co-developer of the STEAM Academy High School in Lexington, Kentucky, where he continues to serve on the advisory board. His JD is from Southern Illinois University and his PhD is from Indiana University in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. And then finally, our panel will be questioning Laura DeRolia. Dr. DeRolia has been a member of the University of Kentucky faculty since 2017 as an assistant professor and has served as a parent representative on the Rosa Parks Elementary School SBDM for the past 5 years. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Elementary Education from Loyola University, Chicago, and a Master's of Education in Curriculum and Instruction from American University. She taught elementary school in California, Washington, D.C., and Missouri for a total of 10 years before pursuing doctoral studies. She earned her PhD in early childhood education with an emphasis on literacy from the University of Missouri in Columbia. Dr. Garolia's current interests include teaching elementary school students social studies methods, supervising student teachers, and creating partnerships with elementary schools. And with that, we'll begin our examination.
Good afternoon. My name is Grace and I am a junior at Stephen County High School. We would like to start the examination portion of our hearing by calling our first witness to the table, Ms. Liz Irwin, Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of School Councils. Thank you again for being here today. Please begin your testimony whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the Student Voice team for creating this space to revisit the enduring promise of Rose versus Council for Better Education. I am Liz Irwin, Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of School Councils, and I'm honored to testify on behalf of the thousands of parents, teachers, principals, and school council members across the Commonwealth who continue the work envisioned in the wake of Rose. School-based decision-making councils, or SBDMs, are one of Kentucky's most important democratic innovations in public education. As this hearing reminds us, Rose demanded more than a better funded system. It called Kentucky to build a fundamentally different kind of public education system, one capable of delivering adequacy, equity, and meaningful opportunity for every child. One of Kentucky's boldest responses to that challenge came through the Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1990, when lawmakers recognized that school improvement could not rest only in state policy or district offices. It also had to live where students actually experience school every day. And that is how school-based decision-making councils came into being. Through KRS 160.345, Kentucky created formal public governing bodies at the school level built on a powerful belief: the people closest to students should have both voice and authority in shaping the conditions for their success. And it is important to be clear about what councils actually are. They are not informal advisory committees. A school council is a statutory decision-making body composed of a principal, 3 elected teacher members, and 2 elected parents. In some schools, bylaws allow for additional proportional parent and teacher representation, but Kentucky law goes even further to protect representative voice. In schools with 8% or more minority student enrollment, councils must include minority representation. And if that representation is not achieved through the regular election cycle, the principal is required to conduct a special election process for additional minority parent and teacher members. This structure ensures that both professional educator voice, family voice, and historically underrepresented perspectives are embedded in school governance by law. That representative structure is then reinforced through a formal election process. Teachers elect the teacher representatives, parents elect parent representatives, and the school council also carries real legal obligations. New members are required to complete 6 hours of introductory training, and returning members are to complete 3 hours of annual training every year thereafter through KDE endorsed providers like KASC. Council members are required to understand statutory decision-making authority, bylaws and policy adoption, legal boundaries with boards and superintendents, consensus and governance practices, open meetings and open records requirements. And so that means that councils must post agendas, meet publicly, keep minutes, document votes and policy actions, maintain records, follow Kentucky law in how decisions are made. This is a profound model of public governance. It's from centralized control to shared leadership, from parent involvement to parent governance, from teachers as implementers to teachers as policy partners, from school improvement happening to improvement happening within schools. So together, councils establish school policy and make decisions in areas defined by Kentucky statute, including instructional practices, school scheduling and use of time, discipline and behavior policies, school improvement planning, staffing consultation, budget priorities aligned to student needs, and more. For 35 years, this model of shared leadership has helped Kentucky schools respond to local needs with greater precision, trust, and ownership. At their best, councils are one of the clearest ways that Kentucky translated the constitutional promise of Rose into the daily life of school. SBDMs matter because they make public education truly public. For parents, councils provide a meaningful voice, not symbolic involvement, but a seat at the table where real decisions are made. For teachers, councils honor professional expertise. Teachers are not merely implementers of decisions made elsewhere. They are co-designers of the conditions for student success. For principals and staff, councils create shared ownership, transparency, and trust. When people help shape the work, they are more invested in the outcomes. I have seen this firsthand from nearly every perspective SBDM was designed to honor. As a teacher member, a parent member, and a principal member working alongside councils, and now as the executive director of KSC supporting councils across Kentucky. So across these roles, I have watched councils revise policy to ensure all students have access to challenging curriculum, revise discipline policy to create more restorative environments, and make staffing recommendations that honored student needs. Most importantly, I have seen councils create the conditions where difficult decisions become community decisions instead of top-down mandates. That distinction matters deeply in schools. The current state of SBDM in Kentucky is both resilient and, like we heard a few minutes ago, under legislative pressure. The most immediate example, as was shared earlier, is Senate Bill 152, which sought to drastically diminish school council authority by removing their ability to create school-based policy and reducing councils to an advisory role only. Under that model, major decisions about instructional practices, budgeting priorities, and professional learning would move almost entirely into the hands of the principal, with councils left to consult but not truly decide. That shift matters deeply. For more than 3 decades, Kentucky's SBDM structure has been intentionally built on shared leadership among principals, teachers, and parents. Senate Bill 152 challenged that very foundation by replacing authentic collaboration with a model that risks unilateral decision-making and diminished public voice. What concerns me most is not only the possibility of the statutory change itself, but what it signals: a move away from the belief that the people closest to students should help shape the policies that govern their schools. When councils are reduced to advisory bodies, teacher expertise can be sidelined, parent partnership becomes symbolic, and schools lose one of their strongest structures for transparency, trust, and durable implementation. When we weaken councils, we weaken one of the clearest governance responses Kentucky created in answer to Rose. So, in order to better support SBDMs, we need to first protect the statutory integrity of SBDM. Kentucky should resist efforts that dilute parent and teacher voice or re-centralize decisions that belong at the school level. The authority of councils is not accidental. It is part of Kentucky's intentional response to the democratic and constitutional vision that followed Rose. Second, we need to educate the public about what councils actually do. There is significant confusion across the Commonwealth about whether councils choose curriculum, select principals, or make personnel decisions beyond their authority. The reality is that councils govern school-level policy within clearly defined statutory boundaries, and helping the public understand that distinction would reduce misinformation and strengthen trust. Third, reconnect SBDM to the unfinished promise of Rose. This is bigger than like governance mechanics. Councils are one of Kentucky's clearest examples of democratic participation in public education, where the people closest to students help shape the policies that affect them every day. If Rose promised students the capacities for civic life, then school councils are one of the places where adults model democracy in action. That is central to educational adequacy. The brilliance of Kentucky's response to Rose was that it understood governance matters. Student success does not come only from standards, fundings, or assessments. It comes from those who have, it also comes from who has voice, who builds trust, and who is empowered to solve problems closest to students. School-based decision-making councils remain one of Kentucky's clearest expressions of that belief. If we truly seek to fulfill the promise of Rose, we must not only fund schools adequately, we must also preserve the democratic structures that allow parents, teachers, and principals to steward those schools together.
Thank you so much for your powerful testimony, Ms. Irwin. The passion you have for your work and the clear understanding you have for this field is evident, and I'd love to dive into that understanding with a couple of questions. Having been a principal, teacher, SBDM member, and now serving as executive director of KASC, can you speak to the differences in schools that foster community building on SBDMs as compared to schools that don't? From your perspective, how have SBDMs helped to build communities in schools?
So one of the biggest differences I see when we're talking about schools that have those effective community building structures in place is first of all, it fosters parental engagement. So in places where the families feel like their voice matters and that they can truly make a difference and make decisions for the school, that's where there's more of that community building. That's where people want to serve on councils, that kind of thing. In places where there's not that evidence that my voice matters, that I actually have a seat at the table, that's when you've got more of the top-down decisions happening. It's not that community building together. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. And next, as a teacher, how did you see yourself and your colleagues being affected by SBDM and school board decisions? What can be done to improve teacher voice?
So as a teacher, and I think that teachers have a little bit of an advantage as a council member because they're seen as like the content or child-centered experts. So when I was a teacher member, I felt like my voice was valued, and I felt like I had to intentionally make sure that the parents understood that they know their child better than anybody, right? So when we think about, can you ask your question again?
Of course. As a teacher, how did you see yourself and your colleagues being affected by SBDM and school board decisions? What can be done to improve teacher voice?
Okay. So what I saw as a teacher member was, especially when it came to the decisions that the council has authority over, not just the ones that they make policy for, but staffing, for example. So councils are supposed to decide how many people per position in your school. So I saw as a teacher member that I could make a real difference in what was provided for our students through what we did as a council. Now, as far as the school board goes, there was some differences, and this was back, in the late 90s when I was a teacher, early 2000s. We always felt like that the school board was so far removed from us. And we felt like, as a teacher, that we knew what was best for our school because we were the ones there. And so that when the school board would make decisions, and it would be more like funding how many staff your school would get, those kinds of things, we felt like the school board members who would come to the school, who had ties with the actual school itself, could make better decisions, and that's how it would affect us. We felt like the ones that really knew us are the ones that made decisions that were good for our school and our kids.
Thank you again, Ms. Irwin, for being here today. I'll pass it off to Anvi for a final question.
Hi everyone, my name is Anvi and I'm a junior at Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School here in Lexington. We had 2 more questions for you, Ms. Irwin. So this year we've seen a lot of proposals like SB 152, which thankfully did not pass in our legislature. So we've seen that SBDMs are under a threat from the General Assembly. So we wanted to ask, what can Kentucky policymakers and education advocates do to better support SBDMs and their role in public education?
One of the biggest hurdles that we are seeing, and this is from the legislators, this is from people in schools, this is from teachers, parents, is that, and something that we talked about, teachers, people don't know what councils do. So I had to testify to the Education Committee about Senate Bill 152, and the questions that they were asking me, the legislators, they didn't understand what council could do, what their legal authority was. So one of the biggest ways that we can support councils is by being very clear about what councils are allowed to do, what they're for, and how that council members have to have training, so they know, they're trained every single year in knowing what their statutory boundaries are. So that's one of the biggest hurdles to overcome, is education of the community. Another one is helping, I think with the legislators, it seems that we were able to help them to see the power of councils by helping them to see where the parent voice comes into play. Because right now, the very folks that were against councils at the state level in the legislature, they're the ones that tout, we want parents to have the choice, right? Okay, if you want the parents to have a voice, then councils create that, not as advisory roles, but as parents who have seats at the table with that authority.
And then I know a lot of us here are parents, teachers, and students. So I wanted to ask, how can we take action through local organizing or advocacy to help make SBDMs and school boards function better in Kentucky?
So, one thing, like I mentioned, education. We've got to get the word out about what councils do, and that's on us as an organization too. Another avenue, and this is something that we've been talking to the School Board Association about, is working together. A lot of our groups try to do this at the state level, but for students and people in the schools, one thing that you can do is talking to people on school boards, making sure they know where the authority lies, what the power of councils, where they're effective. They don't have data, at the state level that says that councils aren't effective. They're just throwing it out there as a fix to a solution that they're not even sure what the problem is, if that makes sense. So anything we can do, like locally, to talk to it takes, one conversation at a time.
Thank you so much for your time today, Ms. Irwin. We really appreciate your insights. Now we would like to welcome Dr. Justin Baffin for his questions. Dr. Bathan is a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies at the University of Kentucky and was a co-founder of the STEAM Academy High School. Thank you so much for being here, and please begin your testimony whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you all for the privilege of public testimony today on school governance. I feel like there's many people in the room that could have done this, so I appreciate you all asking me. I've worked in education for around 20 years, most of those as a professor and a center director. In that job, I've been able to work closely with schools all across the Commonwealth. Of course, STEAM Academy is one school that was like a passion project for me, and Grace can tell you some about, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we got to do a from-scratch high school build, which not everyone gets to do, and it was a great privilege. So I've had at least a loose relationship maybe with about half of the districts in Kentucky over those 20 years. An overriding question throughout all my time is how we upgrade and sustain great schools that provide vibrant, robust experiences for young people. Keeping our democracy healthy, as is the theme today, depends on our ability to answer that question consistently. I've sort of personally long concluded the best, most sustainable way to great schools is through educators working as professionals. But is education a profession? So when I teach school law, an activity I always do with students is to show a teaching contract from 1927. So here we are, 2026, about 100 years ago. This is between a school board and a teacher. Some of the provisions included that teachers agree not to smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol. Teachers agree to behave in a puritanical manner, including no dyeing of hair, dressing in bright colors, or wearing makeup. Women teachers are not to keep company with men or get married, and dresses with petticoats underneath were required. And finally, ice cream parlors were strictly prohibited. Maybe someone knows what was going on at ice cream parlors. Okay, it's entertaining in the worst kind of way, but the point is that our schools developed in a very unique context. That's with us still today. For us in Kentucky, prior to 1908, every single school building was effectively its own functional school district governed by local trustees. After that, in 1908 is when we passed legislation, county school districts began to form, and even the very concept of high school and the building of high schools emerged. So while 100 years feels like a really long time, it's just 4 generations, and to me it feels like the blink of an eye. Today, of course, we have advanced, at least a little, and we have the system that we all know. The point is that things feel stuck when you think about the moment, but they are ever-changing when you look across time. In 1990, as has been talked about today, we completed our last major upgrade of school. Kentucky adopted site-based decision-making to empower educators to make local decisions at the school level. This was our professional educator moment. In creating SBDMs, the local nature of local control underpinned the logic. With mostly county-wide school districts established and boards now entrenched, the folks in 1990 thought that those closest to the students and their families were best positioned to make operational decisions. It was a decentralizing, professionalizing choice. But at roughly the same time, and even in that same state law, centralization also played a role. The concept of standardization took root, enforced by mandated testing, school rankings, and punishments. We do not need to unpack all that history today, but we can see how centralizing mandates for national testing and state standards undermined the decentralizing efforts to promote teachers, parents, and administrators' ability to make local decisions. The tension between centralized control and distributed power is one that we will have to negotiate forever. Now today, in 2026, most seem to agree that the era of standardization and centralized control has largely run its course. But what next? What comes after the era of No Child Left Behind? What does the next version of CARA look like for us? The opportunities and the scope of change right now are not substantially different than those on offer in the 1980s and the period leading up to CARA, or even in the early 1900s when county school districts and high schools first took shape. Looking over time, our system reshapes itself fairly regularly. This feels like one of those times. We are living in an era of more structural change, and that creates both opportunities and challenges. So first, I want to convey how much can change, because I know it firsthand. 15 years ago, we were talking about Danville. No school district in Kentucky had considered community, locally based articulations of the skills needed to succeed in their communities. Danville was the first. Right now, nearly all Kentucky school districts, through their boards, have adopted local portraits of a learner. These represent a county-by-county reaffirmation of the values embedded in CARA, the ones over there. We still collectively hold the same hopes for young people as we did then. Those portraits, though, all include non-standardized, skill-based concepts such as collaboration, critical thinking, problem-solving, citizenship, and others, all of that. How we implement those must be crafted and implemented locally through local governance models. Second, to enshrine some of this work, the Kentucky legislature, in bipartisan legislation this cycle, just adopted a definition of vibrant learning and an open door to local accountability in House Bill 257. What this really opens the door to is performance assessment systems as an alternative to standardized assessment. Those performance assessments are intimate, personal, and rely on local bodies to determine and assess student progress. It gives our governance systems something tangible to do, and that task is particularly hard to outsource to a computer. Mostly, from what I've seen personally, performance assessment serves as community celebrations of the best of our students' work. These are happy moments, defenses of learning, all these things. Ask any elementary principal about the parking problems at a presentation of learning night. So how do we capture that energy and involvement for the governance of our school too? Third, and most interesting to our hosts, all of these developments open the door to student voice. These models let us see our students as something more than a test score, and in doing so, help us to recognize they have real contributions to offer right now, not just in the future. 2 lessons underpin my thinking from STEAM Academy worth sharing today. First, we've had 2 permanent student seats on our STEAM Advisory Council from the beginning. Those are regular contributing members elected by their peers. They have always been valuable members and consistently offer the student perspective on decisions we make as a school. It works so well, in my view, that honestly, it's something we don't even think about anymore as a school. Second, even more enlightening to me is that we include students in all teacher and principal interviews at STEAM. Over the many years of doing those, we've come to recognize that students are actually the best position to help us hire new teachers. We have a STEAM teacher in the back of the room. Were there students on your interview? Yes. Yes, there were. So when we put candidates into a performance assessment interview, students quickly deduce the strengths and weaknesses with high accuracy, and they contextualize those into the needs of the whole school. So I'm very confident in stating for the record on camera that student feedback in educator interviews has proven to be the most valuable to sustaining our success at STEAM when hiring new staff. Now, across Kentucky, we have hard, solid evidence that students can help. You, as the student voice team, have been a very big part of that. So one wonders whether, coming out of the discussion today, whether permanent student seats on SBDMs might be a way to reinvigorate the original mission and vision of those councils. Just as it is at STEAM, young people seem poised to be effective partners to professional educators and contributing citizens to our democracy right now. And frankly, we could use the help. So now, while there are opportunities, we are living through a period of immense challenges. The ending of the era of No Child Left Behind has created fragmentation and confusion. It has opened the door to new concepts and new choices, not all of which are positive. There is a new competition underway for the basic questions of why and who and what and how. Should there be school vouchers? Might online school or homeschooling replace the buildings? Can a school board outsource the operation of a district to a corporation? Who can sit on a school board? Should SPDMs even exist? You can see the competition in this new marketplace of ideas. The big questions are on the table again, just as in generations before. To keep our democracy healthy, those questions will need big answers. We need people and leaders to step into those spaces and navigate toward the upgrades. The governance structures of each school will have to contribute. That's the real opportunity today. A new upgrade to the system of schools in Kentucky is waiting to be shaped. Generations before us have done their best to give us what we have today, and now it is your turn.
Thank you so much for your testimony, especially your comments about engaging student voices and having the right balance between centralization and decentralization. Now, I have one question for you. When we go to school board meetings, the members are typically unresponsive to our concerns and focus more on the symbolic exercises and recognitions. What are some reforms the General Assembly could enact to make sure that boards are focused on the concerns of students, parents, and teachers?
So I mentioned performance assessment in the testimony, and I think it's an underrated lever that can be used. And the reason I want to put that forward is, how do we know what's working in school right now is largely judged on a series of numbers generated by tests, and not generated based off of what people are actually experiencing. I think it would be helpful if boards had to be more responsive to what is actually happening in the buildings, and that, I think, would bring the opportunities for student voice much more central to the conversation. Because, for instance, if you're going to do a senior defense of learning, and that senior defense of learning doesn't, all they want to talk about is like worksheets and quizzes, that's a pretty damning moment to the system. And I think it forces everyone to ask harder questions about what learning opportunities are being made available to students along the way. So that would be one. There would be many others. I don't want to go on, but I do think there are structural pieces that can put students in a better position to be taken seriously. And as you see me open the question of, why can't we give you some more formal authority?
Thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Bathan. I'll pass it on to David for 2 more questions.
Good afternoon. My name is David, and I am a junior at Louisville Collegiate School and a member of KSVT. I have a couple more questions for you, Dr. Bathan.
Sure.
My school council does not allow students to serve on it. What is the value of having students in the actual room of these SPDMs rather than just reaching out to students on occasion to get feedback? How can we ensure those student voices in SPDMs are respected and valued when they are in the room?
One thing that happens at our STEAM advisory meetings every time is that we always try to open the door to what's happening in the building that is interesting. And I think students have a better handle on what's going on in the building that's interesting than the adults do. So we tend to get some interesting things that are happening that we wouldn't have picked up on had students not been in that meeting. I told you about the interviewing process and how absolutely central. I mean, it just to give you the reality behind the scenes, I can sort of say this kind of stuff because I don't work for the school district. We also let parents and teachers and everyone have their say, but as we're making the decisions about who gets the offers, the group that weighs most heavily is students. And frequently we'll even ask parents for their feedback first, and then we'll dismiss them because we really want to have a more serious conversation with the people in the building. Because being in the building is a different experience than not being in the building. And students are part of that. Looking back over time as a researcher-ish, think about what's happening for students. You all are gathering qualitative feedback all day, every day about what's going on in the building. You are sitting on a richer pool of data than anyone else is sitting on. And so when students can bring that rich pool of data into those conversations, it helps us make better decisions.
Thank you. Dr. Bathen, it's frequently assumed that the youth who serve on these decision-making councils are a skewed, select group of specifically high-achieving students, causing disparities in what is meant to create inclusion. Do you see this within your work, or are the demographics who engage in these programs widely varied? What might drive students to pursue these opportunities, and how might we encourage that participation?
So to answer your question directly, yes, I do see that it's not equally distributed to all different parts of the student building in terms of who participates. I think that's driven mostly by the question of who is winning the game of school. And so it tends to be the students who are perceived as winning the game of school that are in the positions to participate in those moments. What it causes me to wonder about is, why is only one version of winning the game of school valued? When a kid is really strong in a career and technical space, for instance, and so my own son is an amazing mechanic right now as a high school sophomore, but mechanic is not something that really has value in the context of who is winning the game of school. Mechanic does show up over there on the capacities. These skills to compete in the workforce, real. But I think we have to be a little bit more open about who's winning in terms to just let more students feel like I have a proper place contributing to the decision-making of this school because I'm doing something that is valuable to this school, and not just the people who get the best test scores are valuable.
Thank you so much for your time today. That concludes our questions for you, Dr. Bathen.
Okay.
We really appreciate the insight into your perspective.
Okay, thank you all.
As you return to your seat, I'm going to pass it off to Lucy to introduce our final witness.
Hello everyone, my name is Lucy Carter and I'm a sophomore at KSVT High School here in Lexington, and of course a member of the Kentucky Student Voice Team. I would now like to welcome our third witness, Dr. Laura Drolia, who is a professor at the University of Kentucky and a parent representative on the Rosa Parks Elementary School SBDM. Please state your testimony whenever you are ready.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me today. I did not write any remarks, so I'm just going to tell you my story. As mentioned earlier, I do have 10 years of elementary teaching experience. I have about 10 in elementary teacher prep as well, so that is my profession. So for the last 20 plus years, that's how I've spent my time. But something shifted for me in 2020, and that's when my oldest son went to kindergarten. It's very different when you become a parent in an elementary school versus when you're a teacher or when you're preparing future teachers. So I have two kids. I have two boys. Kavi is in 5th grade and Bodhi is in 3rd. And in 2020, the fall of 2020, you may remember what that was like. Kavi started kindergarten on Zoom. So we're at Rosa Parks in Fayette County, and he was on Zoom till like March. And so we did Zoom in the basement of our house with 4 other buddies every day coming over. And I got to see what his kindergarten teacher did. Her name's Mrs. Gabbard. She's still there. What she did on Zoom with 5 and 6-year-olds was absolutely incredible. And having the experience, I never taught kindergarten. I went to 2nd grade. Kindergarten is something, it's a whole other level. But she had them in small group breakout rooms. She had us go to the school and everybody got picked up individual bags of all the supplies for the winter holiday party. So everybody's on Zoom making the same crafts and having the same snacks. And they really built a community and also learned on Zoom when they were 5 and 6 years old. So for me, that was just such a powerful example of strong teaching. And I thought to myself, I just want to give back to the school. I really do want to do something to express my gratitude and maybe even leverage some of my professional skills to help. And so I was sitting in my office one day on campus, and I got an email. The principal sent an email out to everybody that said, if you're interested in SBDM, send in a paragraph bio. And I was like, oh, cool, I can do that. I had no idea what SBDM was. Even with my background, I've never taught in Kentucky schools, Kentucky public schools, elementary schools, but I didn't know what it was. I was like, sure. So I sent my bio. I had no idea it was an elected position. So then I was told, you have to come to the PTA Zoom meeting and give a pitch to get elected. And then I was in it, and there were like 8 of us. And so we all gave our pitch, and then I was like nervous, because I was like, people are voting for me. And I got elected, and I'm on year 5 right now. And I can tell you something about that. I think that first year, it was COVID, families could not go into school. Everything was so detached. I think a lot of people just wanted some sort of involvement. Since then, the number of candidates for SBDM at our school has dwindled, so much so that last year I was asked to put my name in again because there were not enough people. So I'm not doing this this hard-hitting campaign every year to keep doing it. At this point, I am doing it because there's a need that needs to be filled. But my experience has been very procedural. So we have meetings once a month, every 3rd Thursday, and the principal leads them, and we go over the budget, and we go over school policies, we go over test scores, we go over staffing, things like that. There has never been a contentious moment. There has never been any sort of hostility. It's been very procedural. The most I have felt in my experience that I had an impact was last year our principal retired, and so SBDM Council is responsible or is a part of the principal hiring process. And so I got to, how that worked is the school chief for Rosa Parks solicited feedback from teachers and families about characteristics they wanted in a new principal. The chief brought that to SBDM. We created the job description. It was posted. We reviewed the candidates, so I got to see all the candidates who met our requirements. We chose the 5 or 6 to be interviewed. We conducted all of the interviews, and then we put forth our top 2 unranked, top 2 candidates, and those names went to the superintendent. That's not how it used to be. I think SBDM used to have more power in selecting the principal, but that's how it went. And that was a time when I felt that my participation was a part of some decision-making experience. So I joined the council to give back to the school. I will say that not a lot of people know about it, like has been mentioned. When my name has come up, I've had friends at the school say, oh, I saw your name on that thing, I'm gonna vote for you because you're on it. Not knowing what they're voting for, but just saying they'll vote for me. So I think my professional experience has helped me sort of understand the landscape of schools and to participate in that board in a meaningful way. And I will not be seeking re-election this year because I think it's somebody else's turn, but that's been my experience on a council.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Your insight as a parent serving on an SBDM brings a very important perspective to the discussion today. We will now turn to your questions. First, currently you are the Commissioner of Education, does not sit on the Kentucky Board of Education. Further, school superintendents do not sit on district boards. In your experience, would local school governance become more effective if principals were no longer a part of SBDMs?
In my experience, I would say, well, I'm curious to hear more about what the thought is behind removing principals or what might happen if that happens. In my experience, the principal runs the meeting. So the principal brings us the budget. The principal brings us the schedule. The principal talks to us about staffing. If the principal is not doing that, I don't know who is running the meetings. And I do think the shared part means that the administrator needs to be a part of it. So the principal, the teachers, the parents, and I should say families, just to acknowledge that not all students live with their parents, but the families who are a part of it, I think the principal, the principal sets the tone for the school. The principal is the leader of the school, and I think they play a role in SBDM. So I don't know that it would do much to change. And again, in my experience, every vote has basically been unanimous. There are not the principal has never casted a vote that breaks a tie or anything like that. In other places it may be more contentious, but I would like to think that the principal being a part of it is important to maintain the shared part of the governance.
Your second question is, you have served as a parent representative on the Rosa Parks Elementary School SPDM for the past 5 years. How do we get more parents involved in participating in school governance, whether through district boards or school councils? And why is it important to have parents involved in school decision making?
I think a theme we've heard is just educating people about what SBDM is, what it does. It is not the same, obviously, as volunteering for a PTA event, or there are a lot of ways to be involved in school, and people are going to be more drawn to one opportunity than another. This one does require training. It's a whole different capacity of family involvement. And so I think people need to know more. I mean, I admitted I didn't even know what I was signing up for when I signed up for it. The people who have voted for me don't even know what they're voting for. They just know me. So there's a real big lack of education about what this board does and what it means to be a part of it. And so I think that's sort of the first thing, is just tell people there needs to be a better campaign for teaching people what it is.
That concludes our questions for you, Dr. Julia. Thank you for your responses, and thank you again for being here with us today.
You're welcome.
Please join me in thanking all of our witnesses today for their dedication to Kentucky students, for their commitment to accountable school governance, and for their time and testimony today. Thank you, all of you. Now we'll pass it back to our host and get ready for our small group activities.
Like Lucy said, thank you guys so much for those incredibly informative testimonies and follow-up questions from our examiners. So before we move into our small group activity, I want to take a little time to do some priming and some housekeeping. The testimonies you heard from the 3 witnesses largely revolved around school-wide governance bodies, not district-wide. Boards of education are an equally important component of district decision-making processes. We felt it was important to highlight SBDMs given their direct tie into KIRA and less public knowledge of how they operate. But boards in Kentucky are facing similar challenges, from legislation like we talked about earlier to financial mismanagement. All of you guys are aware of those issues because they've been impacting you directly. What we've heard from teachers, students, and community members all around Kentucky is the desire for a better school governance system and reform to how school governance bodies operate. That is why it is so important to have members of these school governance bodies that reflect the goals and values of the communities that they represent.